Up. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities against members of the Senate and to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the President, including by repeating extraneous material that would be improper if spoken in the member's own words. Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2015. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Peters, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of our special order. Americans have seen a change in our economy firsthand and are concerned about what it means for their place in the new economy. We can't stop the forces that are transforming our economy and our world, but we can and we must look to the future to find the solutions that adapt to this new economy. We can't live in the past. This means boosting the creation of high-quality jobs by lowering barriers for small businesses to succeed and investing in infrastructure and research. It also means giving Americans the skills to work the jobs of the future that are being created. In March 2015, the new Democrat coalition released Winning the Future, which outlines how we can grow our economy, preserve the American dream, and make government work better for the people. The principles presented in the agenda and report represent ideas that anyone, Democrat, Republican, Independent, can support. The recently released report consists of 200 legislative actions, including items for every one of our members. More than 57% of those bills, 110 in total, are bipartisan, and more than 30 bills have advanced through a committee of the House or through the House as a whole. More than 20 items in the report have become law or have been implemented by an executive agency. This represents not just a plan, but tangible progress. And today we will share what that means for growing the economy in every town and city in America and helping hardworking Americans thrive in the changing global economy. Federal funding for research and development has been on a downward trend for the past several decades. Today, the federal government spends almost 2/3 less on research and development than it did in 1965 as a portion of discretionary spending. The lack of funding has led to a $1.5 trillion investment deficit, and a growing number of America's best young researchers are taking their talents to other industries and other countries. We need to reinvest in our young researchers to remain globally competitive. And on that subject, I want to yield now to my friend, Representative Derek Kilmer from the state of Washington.
I thank my good friend from San Diego for yielding. The date was October 4th, 1957. The time was 7:28 p.m. when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. It was a wake-up call to the United States, and it was perceived as an existential threat. And the reaction to that was a focus by our federal government on national research, on basic research to drive innovation, to step up to that perception of threat. And the outcome of that was extraordinary scientific breakthroughs. I often point to the cell phone in my pocket. A lot of the technologies in that cell phone, from the lithium battery that powers it, to the touch screen that allows me to navigate on it, to the internet that helps me find a delicious Chinese restaurant to go have dinner, to the GPS system that helps me navigate my way to that restaurant, all of those innovations, the basic research behind it was funded by the exact same venture capitalist, Uncle Sam. And part of the prosperity agenda that the new Democrat coalition has put forward is focused on redoubling our investment in basic research, because the reality is, though we don't have Sputnik being launched by the former Soviet Union, the reality is we face a Sputnik moment every single day, with the threat of new innovation happening someplace else and jobs being created someplace else. You heard my friend suggest that research and development as a percentage of gross domestic product since the early 1960s has declined by nearly 2/3 just in these last 4 decades. In contrast, you've seen China substantially increase its investment in higher education, and in fact, according to the National Science Board, by 2022, China will invest more in research and development than the United States of America. China has now surpassed the United States as the world's largest exporter of high technology. So every single day, we're facing a Sputnik moment. And the reality is, while the 20th century was defined by an arms race and a race for military might, the 21st century race is for brains and for research and development. So that downward trajectory of investment in federal research is something that, as part of the New Democratic American Prosperity Agenda, we're seeking to stem. We want to revitalize investment in basic research and reauthorize what was known as the America Competes Act, which was passed by this body in a bipartisan form less than a decade ago. That came out of a report by the National Academies called Rising Above the Gathering Storm that suggested that if the United States was going to compete as a nation, that we had to significantly increase America's investment in research and development. And unfortunately, since the passage of that act, you have not seen Congress keep up with that. In the wall of my office and in the wall of the office where I worked when I worked in economic development professionally, we had a sign up, and it said, "We are competing with everyone, everywhere, every day, forever." And that's true not just when you look at folks working in local economic development in Tacoma, Washington. It's true with regard to our nation today. We are in a global competition. Steve Jobs, before he passed, said, "Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower." And I think it's important that the United States maintains its economic leadership and its leadership in innovation. And Lord knows there's extraordinary challenges that still need to be tackled. Climate change could be 2016's Sputnik moment. Investing in breakthroughs in green technology, increasing energy independence. Not only will those innovations lead to solving our world's problems, it'll create jobs here in the United States of America. Paul Otellini, who was the former CEO of Intel, said that without raising our game in federal research, the next big thing won't be invented here, and the jobs associated with that innovation won't be created here. I think we can do better, and I think we need to do better, and I think the American Prosperity Agenda that the New Democrat Coalition has put forward suggests a better path. And with that, I yield back to my good friend.
I thank the gentleman, thank Mr. Kilmer for his leadership on this and for coming to join us today. And speaking of climate change and those kinds of issues, front and center in the changing economy in this decade is a fundamental shift in the way that we provide power for our economy. It's time to fully embrace the transition to a clean energy economy, to reduce our reliance on foreign fuels, to create high-quality jobs, and to protect our environment. Last year, New Dems helped to extend tax credits for the investment and production of solar and wind power. This will drive an estimated $70 billion in private sector investment in wind and solar energy. The wind and solar that will get built as a result of this investment will reduce emissions in the equivalent to take every American car off the road for 2 years. And New Democrats have put forward proposals to invest in alternative energy research in the military and further expand the deployment of clean energy across the country. New Democrats are working to move the country forward to a clean energy economy that gives our children a better chance at a future with cleaner air, cleaner water, and economic prosperity. The Harvard Business School's United States Competitiveness Project has outlined 8 actions it recommends that Congress take to make America the most economically competitive place in the world to do business, not just to raise corporate profits, but to increase wages for working people across America. Among those 8 steps, including immigration reform, responsible federal budgeting, simplification of federal regulation, and investing in infrastructure and research, is tax reform. A modern tax code for the United States should foster business development and innovation, support hardworking families, and create opportunities for Americans to prosper in a 21st century economy. The current tax code is a complicated collection of outdated provisions riddled with loopholes and serious need of comprehensive overhaul. New Democrats have advocated for comprehensive tax reform while putting forward common-sense proposals to fix some of the most critical provisions in our tax code. This includes Chairman Ron Kine's proposal to promote American manufacturing and Representative Patrick Murphy's to spur investment in startups. New Democrats are working to reform our tax code and make America the most competitive place in the world to do business. With more than 11 million immigrants forced to live in the shadows and countless others waiting in line outside the United States, it's clear America needs bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform. As long as Congress continues to delay action on comprehensive reform, the United States continues to lose out on top talent from around the world. Our economy suffers as bright minds go elsewhere, and families remain separated. I've worked with New Democrat coalition member Joaquin Castro on one such effort to modernize and streamline the United States visa system. And together, New Dems have advocated for a comprehensive solution that includes an earned path to citizenship and improved border security. This is supported by groups from across the spectrum and will grow the economy, create good jobs, reduce the budget deficit by $200 billion in the debt in the first decade alone. I'd now like to yield again to my colleague from Washington State, Representative Kilmer.
Thank you, Congressman Peters. I want to speak further to some of the issues and ideas laid out in the New Democrat Coalition's American Prosperity Agenda. I think one of the things I appreciate about the approach is it understands that there's not a silver bullet to getting this economy moving again. It's more like silver buckshot. Frankly, there's a whole bunch of things that we've got to do to get our economy ready for success in the 21st century and have it be an economy that works for everybody. One of the things when I'm home in Washington State that I hear quite a bit about is adequate investment in our roads and our bridges and our basic infrastructure, everything from transportation infrastructure to energy infrastructure. I know this is not always the most exciting subject. I've often pointed out that infrastructure is a Latin word, structure meaning structure, and infra meaning boring. But it's actually incredibly important. We know that when we saw a bridge actually go down on Interstate 5 over the Skagit River just a couple years ago. We know that when in many parts of my state, and frankly in many parts of this country, speed limit signs are only there for nostalgic purposes because we're simply sitting in traffic and not able to get our goods to market. And so the New Democrat Coalition has called for an approach to modernizing our roads and bridges, but also modernizing our communications networks and our power grid to help drive economic growth and make it easier for everyone to do business in the United States. The reality is there are too many parts of this country where it's either too difficult to get goods to market, or in a 21st century economy where one of the most important ways of connecting people is through technology, where people simply lack access to high-speed internet. I represent an area where about a third of the district I represent is rural, and we continue to see folks who don't have access to high-speed internet. It makes it much more difficult to start a business or for students to do research on a project, and as a consequence, it makes it much more difficult for our country to compete. And it's why the Prosperity Agenda calls for a new approach of making smart investments in that basic infrastructure. And I yield back to my good friend.
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed with amendments H.R. 636, an act cited as the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act of 2016, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. I'll yield once again to my colleague from Washington State. He's to address small business issues.
I actually wanted to just speak to one more issue that is part of the American Prosperity Agenda, and that's a focus on small business ownership. And there's a number of pieces as part of that. Congresswoman Del Bene, also of my state, has a bill that's focused on women's small business ownership. Congressman Himes of Connecticut is focused on issues around cybersecurity, and I've been working on legislation along with Congressman Hanna of New York, focused on providing resources to small businesses that are working to combat cyber attack. The reality is we know that small businesses are a key part of our economic future. You often hear that small businesses are the backbone of our economy. I like that saying. I think that's a good saying. I always say that small businesses are our star running back. They are Marshawn Lynch. They are who we should have handed the ball off to at the end of the Super Bowl a couple years ago. And I say that because if you look at how the United States has generally made it out of recessions, it's not our largest employers that are ones that are pulling us out of recessions. It's our small businesses that are racking up the tough yards and scoring the touchdowns. And I think one of the fundamental roles of the federal government, at the very least, is to get out of the way of our star running back, but ideally to do some blocking for them and to enable and to call some plays for them and enable them to score some touchdowns. And so a lot of the focus of the American Prosperity Agenda is to make it easier for entrepreneurs to succeed, whether that be to raise capital or to start a business or to combat hurdles that might present barriers to their business's success, like potential cyber attacks. And that's an important part of this agenda, and I think it's important to speak to that because, again, as we look at how to grow this economy, I think the small businesses of our country that already exist and those that are yet to be created are going to be an important part of that solution. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We've heard an introduction to how New Democrats are working to expand entrepreneurship, increase exports, invest in research and infrastructure, and set up Americans for success in the new economy. Our economy isn't going to stop changing, and neither should our efforts to find the most innovative, effective solutions for adapting to those changes. The Harvard Business School's United States Competitiveness Project has outlined 8 actions it recommends that Congress take to make America the most economically competitive place in the world to do business, not just to raise corporate profits, but to increase wages for working people across America. Those include New Democrat priorities like tax reform, responsible federal budgeting, simplifying federal regulation, investing in infrastructure and research, and fixing our broken immigration system. I want to thank all the members of the New Democrat Coalition for their proposals for progress and to increase prosperity and help hardworking Americans thrive in the changing global economy with more jobs, more skills, and more wealth. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
I think I'd like to claim the balance of time. The gentleman will give that to me.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2015, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Grayson, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to discuss something that may not otherwise be discussed this year in this Congress, the wretched state of racial relations in America today. We passed a bill here about a month ago in the House of Representatives to eliminate the term Oriental from the law books. I submit that eliminating a term does not eliminate the racism that embodies that term. And I think it's about time that we recognize what this problem is, the fact that it still festers in America and give some thought about what we can do about it. I want to begin by relating two stories, both from my home state of Florida. First one involves a 16-year-old girl. She's white. She had an encounter with police officers who were also white. She lived on the Atlantic coast, which is largely white. And I heard about this from a friend of a friend. What happened to her is that her parents got a call from the police officers late one night. They didn't tell her why they were calling, but they said, "You have to come to this location. We need to talk to you about your daughter. She's here with us." Mother went to that location, spoke to the white police officers. They informed her that her daughter had been drinking in a car with her boyfriend, and they needed to take her home. She was shaken up a bit, so was the daughter, but everybody ended that night alive. Now I want to tell you a different story. Didn't end so nicely. This was on the Gulf Coast, the coast of Florida that is heavily African American. And on the Gulf Coast one night, there was a theme park